Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our topic tonight is changes in retail. And I've got a guest that really knows what he's talking about in this regard. David Ian Gray is his name. He's a top 100 retail influencer. He's a senior advisor to executives in the retail business. He's the founder of an organization called DIG 360. He's a speaker. He's a lecturer. I had the opportunity to see him speak just last week at the ICSC, the big shopping center conference in Whistler, British Columbia, and he had a really good panel, and he was a great moderator, and he opened it up with a good review of what's going on in the industry. He's got a 29-year background in finance, market research, strategic planning, sustainability, etc. He's worked with a number of leading organizations, and I think he's got a good sense of what's going on in the retail sector. And so, therefore, it's a pleasure, David, to welcome you to my show. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks for having me on, Brian.
And I should say that you've got your own podcast. That
we ended that when the pandemic ended. It was sort of designed for the pandemic, but that crew and with me part of it are looking to do a reboot. So this is the first we're sharing that knowledge, but 2024 we're gonna see a reboot.
Well, it's great to have you on. So the conference was interesting because I think people are scared because of what's happened because of the pandemic and internet sales and sort of headwinds for the retail sector. They're scared in regards to interest rates and the cost of building new. They're scared with some of the bankruptcies or closures of different stores. They're scared of inflation, but they're also optimistic that things might get better. What's your sense of where the retail sector has been, and is going?
First of all of the above. Like I think what's a continuation from 2020 is just really a chaotic environment overlaying a complex system. And I think prior to the pandemic, all the seeds were there for a lot of disruption to really rattle the industry, and not just online shopping, all sorts of things like supply chain, all of it. But I think most leaders kept staying the course, I guess, thinking, hey, we'll keep doing what got us here. We'll incrementally improve. We'll try and beef up our website, do different things. And then I just think what happened through the pandemic wasn't one thing. It was multiple things that all had ripple effects. And we're seeing that still today. You noted it. Interest rates are a big one, actually. We always think of the shoppers being hit by the interest rates and price inflation. But the retailers have been as well. But there's lots that are doing, you look at Lululemon as an example, they've been thriving throughout, so I don't think there's a blanket statement where we can say all of retail is under duress, but certainly there's large swaths of it that publicly they're gonna speak in an optimistic tone, as they often do, but privately they're gonna be quite concerned about what happens next.
So let's try to break this down. Internet sales. What do you think is happening there? My sense is that it shot up dramatically during the pandemic, but then sort of either came down or settled down. What's your sense of what's happened with internet sales, and what do you think is going to happen with internet sales?
Yeah, well, I think it was almost like a really beneficial proof point that physical retail is vital. Having gone through the pandemic when we couldn't access stores, and as you say, web sales shot up. A lot of people who hadn't really tried it, they were nervous as consumers shopping online, tried it, they found it was okay. And I think a big area was grocery. Most people hadn't been using that channel for grocery. But we also saw when stores opened up again, as you pointed out, we saw those peaks recede, and we came back not to pre-pandemic levels. It was up from that, but different sources account for it differently. But we see sort of something in the anywhere from 10 to 15% of non-automotive retail sales coming through online channels. And again, different retailers will have different numbers. But it's been building. But I think the model that we've all locked into now is it's not either or. The best model for consumers is where we have choice of channel and where we can either order from something from a store, have the staff help us get that and get it shipped, or we buy online, pick up in store. We want to be able to return to a store, have someone help us if something's not sized right. And we're seeing a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, including one named Vessi that was a shoe brand that was on the panel with me that you referenced. They're starting to open up physical stores. So I think it's an all of the above model going forward. And I think online will, retailers tend to be saying they want to hit about 20% just for the economics of the investment. They want to hit about 20% of their sales online, and some might start pushing 30%. But I don't think we're going to get anywhere up over 50 anytime soon.
But 10, 15 going to 20 or 30 is still a significant dent into bricks and mortar retail. And if you think that, 10 or 15 or 20 or 30% of all the stores have got to close, or square footage has got to close, that's huge.
It's not just that, you're right. And it's not that the retail will go away. It's getting reduced and reshaped, right? So the role of the store as a hub where product flows in and out, and direct to the customer. Some brands are playing with stores being their own warehouses for local shipments. So we're seeing a lot of test and learn. You're right. We're already seeing the scaling back of square footage, and malls as well. The top malls are doing great. Yorkdale in Toronto is one of the top in North America, but some of those secondary and tertiary malls are becoming derelict. They're getting, rebuilt into mixed use some retail, but mostly condos, etc. But the other aspect that we don't talk about as much is as online goes up with that kind of magnitude change, there's other effects that happen. For example, the couriers and the last mile delivery, we see in some neighborhoods that's pretty busy with trucks and vehicles, right? And as you say, if it's a 30% gain in the next few years on top of that, what's your infrastructure looking like in sort of dense areas to handle the pickups and then the return of items? So there's a lot of other aspects to the change that, I think are still to be determined.
You had a guy on your panel from Subway that made a really interesting comment about this topic that, frankly, I hadn't thought about before. He said that there's this discontinuity in the marketplace where you send a courier across town, same day delivery, and it costs you $20. But you order something from Uber Eats or Skip the Dishes or something like that, and delivery is $4, and you're supposed to receive it while it's still hot. And there's this complete discontinuity in that regard. And I found that really kind of interesting. And it's interesting as well that that some of these big Chinese brands that are bringing goods across the ocean to us are creating their own distribution system because they're not happy with the expense associated with the existing couriers, and they're effectively establishing systems that are almost like Uber drivers, contract drivers, that all they do is deliver packages. That a company that just didn't exist before, and it's actually a Vancouver-based company, I understand.
Well, one of the consequences of the so-called disruptors, you can start with Amazon, who's primarily subsidized by AWS, their web services division. But we could look at Wayfair. And obviously we're talking now about Shein and Temu and others that are disrupting. But in all those cases, they were heavily, heavily subsidized by either another part of the business or by investors. And the investor game was, we don't, for a long time anyway, it was just keep adding customers to your roster and we don't care what it costs, really. We just want to see those numbers go exponential. And we have a belief that somewhere down the line, we can flip our investment on to the next person, make a lot of money with you. So that's an interesting model, and it is what it is. But what it's done is it's created consumer expectations based on that model. So they expect a retail operator that has to live and die by their own profitability. They expect them to follow suit with, and for example, if we go back a few years, when Zappos, the shoe marketplace, was offering free returns, they kind of started that game. And I'm not saying they told the customers to do it, but they really got on board with customers buying 3 pairs of shoes of different sizes and sending 2 back.
Yep.
And they could do that in their model, but then all retail suddenly are faced with consumers demanding that. And I think we're actually seeing a pushback now on things like returns, the cost of shipping. So you're talking about the shipment, not the return. But there's a lot that still are under an Amazon Prime model where it doesn't cost them to have that delivery, and it's not an even playing field. But I think there's a lot of retailers now saying we can't play that anymore, and we're going to charge that. The point the Subway fellow was making was, I think, not that the other shipments should come down in price, but that deliveries, to be economically sustainable, should be built out more to the consumer. But that's unless the others are doing it, it's tough for you to do it.
Yeah. On this returns, I had an initial conversation, not on a panel, but with a retailer who said that they really encourage the returns to come in store rather than just being sent back, because they actually find that when people return products that they had bought online, they actually spend more than the value of the return. And so it's a way of increasing traffic and increasing business. So they like the returns.
Yeah. And that goes back to my point that stores aren't dead. Again, the number of square feet is changing, but the retailers that can offer that channel in addition to a really well-run online channel, and that they work together in harmony, that's a big win. And I've been seeing similar data that to your point. And it's logical when you think about it, because if I just ship something back, that's the end of it. It's a very in the moment transactional situation. But when I go into a store, we have to make a few assumptions. One is the store is well stocked, and we have to assume the staff are pretty knowledgeable and looking to help. But if I go back with something, I might even be able to, maybe I'm just not using a device properly. There could be something like that, and they can show me, and then go, oh yeah, I'm going to keep it after all. Or it's a sizing issue, but right there and then they can just swap it out. And that's just keeping that original purchase. But now I'm in that store and I'm looking around, I'm here anyway, hey, there's a couple other things maybe I can pick up, and it's great. Right. So, yeah.
Well, it's one of those lines about everything that's new is a repeated of the old, or whatever that line is. A generation ago, I was involved in a business that was doing infomercials. And it was fascinating because the infomercial people said that you needed to have the bricks and mortar, and they could track the difference in their sales in different regions of the United States, where they had bricks and mortar stores versus where they didn't, because while the infomercial was an attempt to sell, a lot of people just watched it for information. And then they actually wanted to go to the local Sephora or the local Ultra or whatever it was to actually try the product and buy the product and or return the product. And so the companies that just did infomercials alone did not do nearly as well as the companies that did infomercials and had bricks and mortars as well. And I think that's the same as internet sales.
Yeah. And I find it's human nature to try and oversimplify things, or to try and decipher human behavior into a linear step 1, 2, 3 pattern. And there's a concept that now is pretty ubiquitous, I guess, in marketing and consumer business anyway, called the customer journey, or customer journey map. And I teach that to students. And the way it gets taught is, you have this linear process of discovery of a brand, and then growing awareness, and then trial, and then purchase. But in truth, we have all these little feedback loops. And that's one great example where the power of that channel isn't necessarily the sale. And we see data where if a direct-to-consumer brand opens up in a market repeatedly, we've got clients like this, sometime in the initial stage, it cannibalizes a little bit your online channel for that catchment area. But over time, you start building your online business in conjunction with the traffic gains of that physical store. Like what you're doing is you're introducing new customers to the brand and they're flipping to online later. And so incidentally, I'm opening up a store, but I'm actually growing my online business by doing so.
It really is the symbiotic relationship of the two. Fascinating. Your comment about the customer journey is interesting. I used to do a bunch of political consulting, and they used to say it takes 7 impressions before someone decides to vote for you. And so when you think about that customer journey you mentioned, it's probably similar in politics, that you've got to build awareness and maybe actually want to listen to the person, i.e. trial, and then maybe do some sampling. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with David Ian Gray, talking about the future of retail, where it is today and where it's going in the future. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is David Ian Gray. He's a retail specialist. He runs a consulting firm that advises senior executives in the retail business about what's going on. He's got a fascinating background. He's got a BCom from Carleton in finance and information systems. He's got an MES in business sustainability from York University. He's got an MBA from the Schulich School of Business at York University. And he's got quite an impressive background. You did something in New Zealand. What were you doing in New Zealand?
Well, that's the funny part. I work a lot with the New Zealand consulate in Canada and a little bit in the States as well. And I repeatedly tell them, I'm not going to buy my own trip to New Zealand. I want to go to New Zealand, but you're going to fly me there. I'm not going till you take me there. And it's, tongue in cheek. But I work with them, but it's here in North America. And people don't realize, it's roughly the population of Toronto, and I don't mean like the broader GTA. It's about 5 million plus people. What they produce is astounding, but they live and die by export. They need to do that, so they're very adept at getting new products to market. And when it's something that's retail oriented or consumer goods oriented, I'm called in to advise the brands that are trying to get a foothold and expand.
You started out as a financial analyst with Esso, then you became a manager of an environmental program at Schulich. You then launched your own consulting company, and then you were a volunteer at something called Passion for Retail Conference. That sounds fascinating.
I actually founded that. That was like a I've done a lot of not-for-profit work, Brian. I worked for retail. Like, you can say that's not for profit.
Yes.
But that was an event. I was kind of early on sustainability, and just back to issue. Like I never completed the MES. I had to enroll in the they have York University has a great globally renowned environmental studies master's. And the reason I did that was coming out of Esso and personal interest, I wanted to create an environmental MBA, but at that time there wasn't one. And so I kind of did my own cobbling together to do so. And I lobbied the dean of the business school relentlessly that they should be doing this. And I think he always felt like, are you some kind of communist? Like, what are you doing? But they ended up taking my ill-formed notes and putting them together to win a bid from a wealthy German grocery exec family. And they started the Schulich School of, at Schulich, they started the environmental program within the MBA. And I guess they invited me back to be part of that launch and startup. So that's that connection. And then I've carried that forward where I can in the retail sector. I'm not an environmental consultant, but I've been part of my job is to keep things top of mind with C-suite. And
Excellent.
So that's part of that story.
And then you were a part-time lecturer at the BD School of Business at Simon University. You worked at the DMZ, which is here in Toronto, as a startup advisor, podcast and co-founder of the Business of Retail, a lecturer in marketing research at Schulich, a lecturer at the BC Institute of Technology. It just goes on and on and on. your New Zealand experience, Capilano University experience, and then DIG 360 Consulting that you've been doing for the last 16 years. So a pretty impressive background, and you know retail real well. Let me ask you a question about one of the comments you made about Yorkdale versus other malls. So my sense is that the retail mall business has changed dramatically, and there's top malls. I was in the Pacific Mall, I think it's called, in Vancouver when I was in Vancouver last week, and it was packed with people. But I was surprised that some of the other malls weren't nearly as successful. And in Toronto, you mentioned Yorkdale, Eaton Centre, maybe Square One, Sherway, but the secondary malls are hurting big time. Why is this sort of separation between the top malls and the secondary malls happening?
I think, and by the way, a lot of trends we can see coming out of the US, by the way, but the US really got overstored. We never quite were at that level. But back to the point you were making earlier in the discussion, retail is closing stores. Like the economic model, as online picks up a chunk of the business, and the margins are pretty good doing so, lesser performing stores are now getting closed and not relocated. And so in a given market area today compared to 10 years ago, a particular brand will be there, but they'll have fewer locations. And part of that is they can feed the less convenient pockets, hopefully with online orders. And they're willing to maybe give up some customers and sales to do so because economically it makes sense. And so that's the retailer's demand for those spaces. As they go down, then there's lesser, I guess, appealing mixes in those markets, in those malls that you're referencing, the tertiary ones, are sort of populated with less interesting retail. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're the tumble down now, right? And so shoppers are starting to go elsewhere, and that feeds that decline. And then the owners are saying, well, look, we're in a certain situation here. We're not going to invest a lot of money into this thing. And then eventually they get to a point sometimes where they'll redevelop the whole property completely. And we see a lot of that going on in Canada.
Redeveloping the secondary malls.
Yeah. Yeah. Into residential. And, I've got examples. Yeah. Well, I always thought Don Mills Center was going to do better than it did. But, there's an example out west. We've got a number here, like on the North Shore, there's Park Royal here in Vancouver, but Capilano Mall has a Walmart basically. Now, I think the way they're rebooting, and this might be of interest to the listeners, is another trend is to get away from product retail altogether and put experiences in. So it's got the largest indoor mountain bike park, enclosed park, where young people, whoever, can learn how to do some tricks and not be in the wet. And so they're filling up the space that way. They're not doing residential, but elsewhere, you're getting developers just owning the property saying, hey, we're just taking down that mall and we're gonna rebuild the site.
One of the speakers last year at ICSC spoke about that and said that malls, to be successful, have to become more like hospitality or entertainment complexes, that you go there for an experience rather than just to buy something. Yeah.
And, I think there's influences that come out of other parts of the world, obviously. And I think Asia has done that really well. It's kind of funny. I think you use the phrase, "I return what's new is old, or old is new." And, there people will do a night out at theater or a cinema, but really nice cinema. And then there's before and after time spent dining, as well as maybe shopping. And the idea is to have a place where you're going to linger, as opposed to, I need to go pick something up, because now we have other ways to do that.
I had an opportunity to go through a new thing in Sherway in Toronto recently called Italy, which is I think it's an old department store area that was converted into this. It's really just a food court, but a whole bunch of high-end, nice places where one can either pick up or order Italian food and shop at the same time because you're in the midst of the shopping, but sit down tables and licensed for alcohol. And it was packed with people with a waiting list to get in. And really I think it is an upscale food court.
I think that's a really great way to describe it. Done really well. And it's very on point. You know, it's Italian food. And I think they built that out. New York City has a couple of iconic long-running eataries, but people who visit New York will, you know, it becomes a tourist destination. Same with Vegas. So that starts building some cachet, and now a lot of markets are kind of just looking for that. They're looking for space. They're big formats, and the consumers are there. They're aware of the brand, and they want to go try it out as soon as they can. So that's a winning concept right now. And you mentioned food court, food hall. You know, you change the name, but the idea of food halls has been sort of a trend for a few years now, which is, as you say, it's often as local chefs. You know, it's not your fast food operators. It's really great, good quality food, but done in small formats. You can almost imagine, you know, your food trucks all going physical and being in one aggregated area where there's common dining, much like you would at the mall food court. And and it's funny you mentioned food, because I think that's a really interesting area. And on the panel at Whistler, I had two of those. We had also the CEO for the group that owns Moxie's and Chop Steakhouse. And we're hearing a lot about the plight of independent, say, chef-owned restaurants right across Canada, especially as the pandemic funding, the loans come due. But at the same time, consumers have not really relinquished their interest in dining out. They're just very interested in not spending as much money as they used to. So really well-run chain operators for casual dining, or even you know, upscale dining that are chain related, who can put economies of scale in place, are really doing well right now. And we have our own homegrown in Canada with, say, Cactus Club or Earl's as well.
Well, I got to tell you, you know, I do okay, but I'm really motivated by the half price wine on Wednesdays or Thursdays at different restaurants. And so, you know, making it a little bit more economic makes a ton of sense. I was really intrigued by the guy from Subway who said that some people don't want choice. And he talked about that at a typical Subway, if you're there in person and you're ordering, you got to make more than 20 decisions on what you want to have. And so he came up with the Subway series where the decision is made for you. And old is new, new is old again. My first job after college was working for the Keg. And at that time, the Keg had 7 choices. That was it. And it was because George Tidball, the head of the Keg at the time, said the same thing. People don't want choice. They want to be told what's a good meal, and this is what you get. What do you think? Is choice important, or is being told what you want to eat, or being given just a few options important?
I think it's the last thing you said. I think we want the illusion of choice. We want a little bit of choice, but there's a concept called the paradox of choice, and it's something I teach as well. And it became best well known as a psychological construct, but it went to the forefront with Carrefour, the big French grocery giant, with their hypermarkets. They, you know, post financial crisis, they were hitting really flat demand, and they had to really sharpen the pencils on how to ensure the bottom line is where it needs to be. And so they were looking at everything. One of the issues was inventory, and they did an experiment. I think, as I recall the story, it was to do with mustards. And I think at one point they were stocking, I'm making the number up, but let's say they had 15 brands of mustard. There was an era in retail where everyone thought the bigger your superstore is, the better, and just stock everything, and that's going to attract shoppers. But what they found was they actually sold more mustard when they brought that down to about 6. And the old Sears model of you have sort of good, better, best, curated, right? Different price points, but it was a much more manageable choice. And we hear a lot of that. That's one of the frustrations with online shopping or even Amazon is if you don't know ahead of time exactly what you want to get and you're laser focused and searching for that, you're actually browsing the internet. You can get overwhelmed by choice. And the psychological construct is there's an anxiety. There's sort of an optimal point between zero choice and too much choice, where it's just enough. Maybe you have a few to pick from, and there's some guidance as to those selections. And as you start adding more and more, there's an anxiety that creeps in. So
Well, I
I
got to
think,
tell you, everyone complains about these cookies that follow you, but I kind of like it when Audible tells me you like these 3 books, so these next 4 books are the ones that you might want to enjoy the most. So having someone give me suggestions is sometimes really helpful. We got to take a break for some messages. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with David Ian Gray, a retail expert, talking about where the retail business is going. We might touch on theaters, maybe grocery anchored retail, and bookstores. And what about Main Street? When we come back, stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about retail and the future of retail with David Ian Gray, who is a retail expert. I had the pleasure of listening to him moderate a panel and speak at a panel at the big shopping center conference that occurred just last week. David, you were saying when we were on a break that you think there's going to be a difference between the haves and the have-nots in the retail sector. Explain that if you could, please.
yeah, and I think in a way it mirrors what we're hearing a lot about in our society and our populations, right? You know, we know through the pandemic, the top sort of wealthy strata did better. You know, they came out of that stronger, and a lot of people actually struggled and are I guess resetting. And I think we're seeing that in retail as well, where the well-funded, the bigger players with scale, and I'm talking about, say, Loblaws, you know, the big grocers, and you can throw in Walmart, Costco, etc., Best Buy. They're facing the same headwinds, but I would say they're stronger businesses today than they were in 2019. And but we're also seeing a lot of stories through, call them the specialty chains, you know, ones you'd know of. The one example I gave you was Mastermind Toys, which, you know, just before Christmas, which is pretty unheard of, they went into a receivership situation. They've since been bought, so they're gonna come out of it. But you know, those kind of organizations, I think, are going to be very hard pressed to keep up with the pace of change and the investment needed and the pivoting needed. Whereas some of the very big players, I think they have the scale. I think Walmart, as an example, there's a lot of fear, I guess, around it that Amazon was going to knock it out, and we can see now that didn't happen. It made them better. You know, Walmart's a much stronger business today than it was 20 years ago. But the one, and I do have concerns for chains that we all kind of have come to appreciate and expect to be around. I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of months if we see some more demise, and maybe ones we weren't expecting to be in trouble. It wouldn't shock me. The one thing I'll say, though, is I actually am getting really bullish about independent retail. And I know they're going through a tough run right now. And with the CEBA loans coming due, you know, we're going to lose some. But especially those run by younger entrepreneurs, they're just so nimble, and there's so many great ideas coming out that, yeah, I think of it as a Darwinian soup, you know, and there's a lot of bad retail. I don't glorify mom and pop retail. I think it's a hard living, but there's a lot of poor retail out there, but there's some really bright lights. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the innovation. And I think we in our neighborhoods, if it's about immediate convenience just around the corner, we want to pick something up, we're as happy with a really good independent as we are with the chain. And if we're talking about specialty things, like I'll give an example. I'm out in BC. I'm from Ontario, so I had to kind of figure out what fishing was out here, and it's quite different. And fly fishing seemed kind of a cool thing, but totally new learning curve. I wasn't going to figure all that out online and buying from Amazon. I found a really great local shop that all the people in there are teachers as well as, they're not selling, they're helping, right? I wouldn't be able to get that from a chain or a Bass Pro. So I think there's real opportunities for independence. But again, there's going to be a lot of tumultuous moments in the next year for that class of business. But I worry more about legacy, larger scale chains that are just not keeping up and they're not modernized.
But I think it was in your panel where people talked about sort of the change of the style of retail and used the Apple Store as one example of being there, helping you, being very open, customer friendly, and as you say, helping you rather than selling you necessarily, and the stock being sort of in behind, I think was mentioned.
Well, funny about Amazon, though, I don't think they've really changed much about their store model now. When we reference it's a dated story, but I would say it was one of the most amazing. It wasn't about the technology. They just rethought how to sell things. Like this idea of self-checkout, it doesn't apply there because their staff are there helping you and you buy the thing where they're standing. Like that, little things like that. Why couldn't any other chain have thought of that? That it was more a conceptual innovation than, it wasn't like we're putting someone on Mars. But they did all that so well. But the irony is, I teach innovation in retail, and so much of it comes from outside. Like Amazon's an outsider who got into retail. Apple was a wholesaler who decided they're going to just blow up their retail network and do their own. But when they did that, they didn't copy anything. They reinvented how stores could work, and it was great. But it took that outsider approach. And that who knows what's going to come on the scene in the next few years. I can predict something will. I can't predict what will.
You mentioned going out for a show. What's happening with theaters? Theaters were shuttered during COVID. Some people fell in love with the big theaters and the big screens in their houses. Is the movie business still a good business?
Yeah, and I think again, all these things, I think if someone's trying to benchmark to the heyday of people going to the multiplex or whatever it is, we're not going to see those days again. But that doesn't mean the selected opportunity to have an evening out. And I would argue, especially in a tougher economy, it's a more affordable evening out. There's something about that. And I know that Cineplex, as an example, a lot of the stock analysts are quite bullish on the stock going forward, and they've had some pretty good numbers post-pandemic. And AMC, a lot of these are like developing sort of an adults area where they're doing food and alcoholic beverages and nicer seats. And so we may not go as often as we used to, but when we go, we'll pay a little bit more for that particular visit, and it becomes more of an experience. So I think there's a terrific opportunity. I think there's room for more of those in pockets of our markets that aren't well served. So I think that's a growth area, but I don't think we're ever going to see it go to where, we used to imagine. I'm a certain age, and there's a time where like you'd be going to movies, multiple times a month. I don't see that so much anymore.
What about grocery anchored retail versus strip retail? I heard a comment saying grocery anchored retail is good, but strip retail is bad.
Yeah, and I guess I'll be the first to say I speak like that often myself, but in truth, it's there's room for a lot of there's room for diversity in format, but I think people are different shoppers have different habits, but I think we're slowly moving to a place where we drive less. We want to spend less time in the car. And so the days of doing a shopping Saturday where you go to 5 different parts of town, to cherry pick things, strip mall here, another there, etc. I think we're wanting to be tighter and more of a one-stop shop. And again, I'm making a general statement. I think there's a lot of shoppers who will still behave the other way, but these are tendencies. So I think in grocery, being able to be situated where there's a cluster and you have adjacencies that people would also want to go and shop at. So, maybe a Rona or Home Depot or something like that nearby, if it's suburban, certainly. And then in the cores, we're seeing formats coming in. Like there's a return to core, despite the fact that in the near term, we've got some hollowing out of pedestrian traffic. But the truth is there's still a lot of people who live in our cores of, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, maybe you could argue Calgary. And we're seeing different formats, like Loblaw City Market, for example, going in to serve, more densely towered based populations.
Smaller format grocery stores. I saw an urban fair when I was in Vancouver, which was sort of like a Pusateri's or something like that from Toronto.
Yeah, and they're part of Jim Pattison, is a Pattison Industries is a conglomerate. Under that, their food group, the big banner here is Save On Foods in the West. But Urban Fare is a sub part of that. That's a more upscale. I think when they came on the scene, they were sort of getting compared to Whole Foods, but maybe a little bit smaller format, but better things, a little higher priced. But they're certainly serving they've done well in the markets they've gone into.
Well, one of the big issues that I think a lot of people have is what's going to happen to our main streets. And so maybe we can take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments from you, and maybe talk about main streets. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes, talking retail tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about the future of retail, where it is and where it's going tonight with David Ian Gray, who is a consultant expert in the industry. David, if people want to reach out to you because they want to hire your services or check out some of your thinking, is there a website that they should visit?
Yeah, it's dig360.ca.
So we were just chatting about main streets, and I think a lot of people, during COVID, were worried that our main streets would go away. A generation ago, people thought that the big malls would take away everything from the main streets. But I got to tell you, I was out in Vancouver, as I mentioned, and I walked down Robson Street. It was packed. Now, it wasn't even a nice day. It was a rainy day, but it was still packed. So will Main Street survive? And if so, what do they got to do to survive?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we're seeing in Canada, again, is so many parallels with the consumer experience with the retailer organization experience. And by that, I mean, we've got people getting priced out of markets, because of real estate, surging costs of whether it's rent or own. We're seeing that in retail as well. So the problem is the economics. When it's talking about retail shrinking its footprint, part of that is it's just costing so much more money today to have a location. And again, I'm sort of referencing the major markets. So if we can think of Canada as being, we always forget this part, but there's a lot of Canada that is not just suburban, but smaller town Canada. And if you think of Ontario, if you get out of that tight Golden Horseshoe area, but think of a place like, say, Kingston or Belleville or Windsor or whatever it might be. A lot of those markets, they don't have the same pressures, and Main Street means more there, and you can afford to be there. But in our major markets, you mentioned Robson, but you say Bloor Street or Queen, and even West Queen West in Toronto, that's super cool. The cost of getting in there has become very high. So part of it is that's sort of a constraint, and maybe that'll settle down in future. But what also tends to happen is over time, the trendy areas become more pricey, and they start with independents. Cool independents go into a place like West Queen West is a great example. Back in the day, some restaurateurs, some bars, and then the brands want to go there because that's drawing traffic. And so the cost starts to spike. and those original independents can't afford to be there anymore. Well, they go find another area, right? And so I think there'll always be Main Street retail as a class, but it's going to keep moving around. You know, as soon as something gets too hot, there'll have to be the new area that starts to come up. But there's less of it because of that notion that we don't need as many stores. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the idea of just street front retail in general. And I think that as we densify neighborhoods or we go around transit hubs, there's this sort of policy directive or societal interest in having what's called 15-minute walkable cities, which means you're not in your car, you're not having to drive across town. So not everywhere is going to be a mall. So I think the importance of those street front spaces is, in fact, maybe even more important going forward than it has been the last 10 years. But it has to be, we have to have good retail in there. And if I could just depart for one thing, we do a lot of research on this. If you ask people, do they want to shop local? Because that ties into this. Everyone says, yeah, we should be supporting our local independent, whatever. And then we look and people aren't doing so. So we've done research on the why. And the truth is it's a tiebreaker. So it has to be something that's convenient, but great staff, knowledgeable staff, the right product at a good price, not at a premium price, and you know, good hours and everything else. And if that independent is doing those things, then they will win. You know, it'll be a tiebreaker. But people aren't prepared to sacrifice price or quality or service just for the utopian ideal of supporting their local independence. They want other people to do that. So we need to keep up in the game on that for those independents. They have to do a good job. But if they do, that's what our if you imagine not having them, and I know in Toronto and Vancouver in COVID, there were some derelict stretches. And it just brings down the whole neighborhood, right? Like it's not just about shopping anymore. It's about the vibrancy of a community.
Price, quality, service, and local. And local is the tiebreaker. Sounds like good advice. We're out of time, so we got to say thank you very much to David Ian Gray, chatting with us tonight about the state of the retail industry and where it's going. Really appreciate it, David. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Vancouver, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available after the radio is on my website, briancrombie.com, as well as on social media and podcast services. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Thanks, David.